I think it is working now.
Okay.
Somebody else confirm?
Let's see.
I think I figured out what was the problem. I didn't have it on public settings. I think it is, yeah. I think a couple people have confirmed it is. Thank you. Yes, it is working now. We can go back on the record. Yes, thank you. Recalling the matter of PSC case number 9738, which is the application of Smeco for an increase in rates and changes to its retail tariffs. The hearing did start at 9 a.m. Due to some technical difficulties, we are back on the record live streaming the hearing. We're in the middle of testimony by witness for Smeco, Beth Kennedy. Thank you. I apologize for the break.
No problem, Your Honor.
Technology isn't always our friend.
Thank you. And so I believe where we left off, we had just marked as for identification Smeco exhibit number 10. And I do want to just note, Ms. Seitner brought to my attention, so as part of that packet, 48-20 is marked confidential, but there's nothing confidential in the actual response. The confidentiality applies to the attachments, which are not included in that packet, so there is nothing confidential with respect to what has been marked for identification as Smeco exhibit number 10.
Okay, thank you. So just to clarify, so the attachments that are after, it starts with, I guess, page 1 of 7, item number 48-2, attachment 1, and then beyond? Is that what is contained?
There are no confidential attachments in that packet at all.
Okay.
48-20 is the one that referenced a confidential attachment, but we are not including that confidential attachment as part of this proposed exhibit.
I see. Okay. Understood.
And I'll represent to the bench that these data request responses were served on July 26, 2024, which was 3 days before the deadline to do so under Your Honor's procedural order and 5 days before the deadline for submitting rebuttal testimony in this proceeding. Ms. Kennedy, do you recognize this set of data request responses, which has been marked for identification as Smeco exhibit number 10?
Yes, I do.
Are you the sponsor on behalf of the cooperative of these data request responses?
Yes, I am.
Are all the responses to these data requests true and accurate to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, at this time I would move that Smeco exhibit number 10 be entered into evidence.
Is there any objection?
I have no objection, but I just want to note that we don't agree with, respectfully, with counsel's description that it was 3 days before a deadline. I don't want to waste your time on it here. I just wanted to note for the record that we disagree with that, but we accept it, that it be entered into evidence.
The substance of the
yes, ma'am.
exhibit.
Thank you.
Well, Your Honor, I think it is an important point, so I would just like to clarify, and I apologize for taking the time, but the procedural order does note that any discovery requests served after 4 p.m. are considered served on the next business day. These were served on Sunday at 1:03 p.m., and therefore they should be deemed considered served on Monday, and therefore 5 business days following Monday would mean that the deadline would have been the following Monday, and they were served on Friday. And I say that only because staff witness Val Carengi did make a point of suggesting that they were served after 5 p.m. on a Friday.
Okay. I note the parties' concerns and the issues with the service of data requests. I did notice in testimony the same issue. So as far as this exhibit is concerned, I'm not going to go into the details of serving and response time at this point. Any objection beyond that?
That's fine. Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Staff data request response from the company, item number 48-1 responses will be marked and entered into the record as Smeco's Exhibit 10.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, I would like to have a document marked for identification as Smeco Exhibit Number 11, which I'll represent to the bench as a copy of Smeco's response to staff data request number 1 to all parties, item number 1-1 of that response, along with attachments 2, 3, 4, 6, and 9 of that response. So just to be clear, there are a number of other attachments that are referenced, but included in this exhibit that's been marked for identification as Smeco Exhibit Number 11 are only attachments 2, 3, 4, 6, and 9. May Mr. Duver approach?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
In your honor, I'll represent to the bench that these data request responses were served on July 22nd, 2024, which was 1 day before the deadline to do so under your honor's procedural order and 9 days before the deadline for filing sir rebuttal testimony. Ms. Kennedy, do you recognize this data request response and set of attachments which has been marked for identification as Smeco Exhibit Number 11?
Yes, I do.
Are you the sponsor on behalf of the cooperative of this portion of the data request response that references you by name and the noted attachments?
Yes, I do.
Is this portion of the data request response and the noted attachments, are they true and accurate to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, at this time I move that Smeco Exhibit Number 11 be entered into evidence.
Is there any objection? Okay, hearing none. Response to staff's data request, item number 1-1, with attachments 2, 3, 4, 6, and 9 will be entered into the record as Smeco's Exhibit 11.
Your Honor, and actually I only have 2 more sets of data request exhibits, and these are going to be organized as packets to make it a little bit more easier for everyone. So at this time, Your Honor, I would like to have a packet of Smeco responses to certain OPC data requests marked for identification as Smeco Exhibit Number 12, which I'll represent to the bench are copies of Smeco's responses to OPC data request number 1, item numbers 1-21, 1-30, 1-38, and 1-55, along with OPC data request number 3, item numbers 3-1 and 3-8.
So marked.
May Mr. Duver approach.
Please. Thank you.
And as with all data request responses, I'll represent to Your Honor that these data request responses were provided to all parties in this proceeding, including staff. Ms. Kennedy, do you recognize the packet of data request responses which has been marked for identification as Smeco Exhibit Number 12?
Yes, I do.
Are you the sponsor on behalf of the cooperative of these data request responses?
Yes, I am.
Are the responses to these data requests true and accurate to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, at this time I move that Smeco Exhibit Number 12 be entered into evidence.
Is there any objection?
I apologize. Your Honor, I would object because the line of questioning is related to the testimony of Mr. Valcarengi. I would say there's currently no foundation for admitting Smeco's responses to OPC's data requests unless further questions were asked of the witness.
Your Honor, if I may, I mean, the foundation is that this is the sponsoring witness for the particular facts that are articulated in those data request responses, and equally, if not more important, is the fact that this is information that was within the knowledge and purview of staff witness Valcarengi, and he is the individual to which my questions are currently being directed with respect to his rebuttal testimony.
Does staff want to be heard?
We're fine with admitting them now.
Okay. And I agree that if this is the witness that sponsored the response to your data request, that it be admitted. So I'm going to overrule your objection.
Thank you, Your Honor.
The responses to OPC data request item number 1-21 will be marked and entered into the record as Smeco Exhibit 12.
Thank you, Your Honor. And lastly, I would like to have a packet of Smeco responses to certain staff data requests marked for identification as Smeco Exhibit number 13, which I will represent to the bench are copies of Smeco's responses to data request number 2, item numbers 2-6 and 2-10, staff data request number 5, item numbers 5-1, 5-2, 5-3, 5-5, 5-6, 5-8 corrected, 5-9, 5-10, 5-16, 5-17, and 5-48. Staff data request number 16, item numbers 16-7 and 16-9. Staff data request number 18, item numbers 18-1 to 18-3. Staff data request number 19, item number 19-2. Staff data request number 25, item number 25-11. Staff data request number 29, item numbers 29-2 and 29-4. And finally, staff data request number 31, item numbers 31-1 and 31-2.
So marked as, are you offering it to the record?
Just marking it for now,
Okay.
Your Honor. May Mr. Duver approach?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Kennedy, do you recognize the packet of data request responses which has been marked for identification as Smeco Exhibit number 13?
Yes, I do.
Are you the sponsor on behalf of the cooperative of these data request responses?
Yes, I am.
Are the responses to these data requests true and accurate to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, at this time I move that Smeco Exhibit number 13 be entered into evidence.
Is there any objection? Okay. Responses, and I'm not going to go through all of them. There's quite a few responses to staff bench data or staff data requests. They will be collectively marked and entered into the record as Smeco's Exhibit 13.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Kennedy, if I can now direct your attention to your rebuttal testimony, which was already entered into evidence as Smeco Exhibit number 5, and specifically revised Exhibit BK-1. And just, if you could just look up when you have reached that spot. Your Honor, if you could just let me know as well.
Yeah,
when
I'm
you've-
almost there.
When you've reached it, I appreciate it.
I am there.
Ms. Kennedy, if I could direct your attention to column A of revised Exhibit BK1 of your rebuttal testimony. What does column A represent for Smeco's business operations?
Column A is the operating statement actual results for 2023 for all lines of business with the exception of Smeco Solar.
And what does column E represent for Smeco's business operations?
Column E represents the distribution only test year results.
And when you say distribution only, what has been removed in column E?
FERC transmissional or FERC jurisdictional transmission, power supply, and Empower Maryland.
Ms. Kennedy, if I could now direct your attention to Mr. Valcarengi's surrebuttal testimony, and again back to page 3, which is a portion of his testimony that I read for the record earlier on. On page 3, Mr. Valcarengi states that Smeco experienced an operating profit of $12 million in 2022 and an operating loss of $2 million in 2023, a $14 million change. Is that a correct statement?
That was not they were not operating losses, they were net losses or net profit, net margins.
And earlier on, you referred to, we discussed Exhibit BK, revised Exhibit BK1 of your rebuttal testimony, and you discussed column A of that exhibit. How does column A map over to the numbers that Mr. Valcarengi included in his testimony?
Column A
Yes.
is reflects these numbers.
Do the numbers reflect both operating and non-operating margins across all lines of Smeco's businesses?
Column A does.
Do you consider $12 million in net margins on a consolidated basis to be a positive financial result for the cooperative?
I do not. Smeco had margins of over $20 million for several years prior to 2022.
And Your Honor, if I could, excuse me, Ms. Kennedy, if I could direct your attention to what was entered into evidence as Smeco Exhibit number 8, which are the audited financials of the cooperative for 22 and 23. And if I could ask you to turn to page 31. Of the attachment.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. Can counsel repeat which document we're on?
It was Smeco's Exhibit 8.
Thank you.
Responses to staff data request 5-15.
Thank you.
And page 31 of the attachment. Ms. Kennedy, what does page 31 of the audited financials indicate with respect to the financial net margins for the cooperative for the 5-year period indicated?
So it shows a net loss for 2023, $12 million for 2022, and over $20 million for 21 through 2019.
Thank you. So referring you back to page 3 of Mr. Valcarengi's surrebuttal testimony, he indicates in his testimony that he does not understand what happened in 2023 that caused Smeco's margins to decrease by $14 million from 2022 to a net loss of $2 million. Can you please explain what caused the cooperative to experience such a decrease in margins?
So there are several things. First of all, there was in 2022, we had an unbilled revenue entry at the end of the year of $9.2 million that increased margins by $9.2 million relating to the cold weather experienced in Winter Storm Elliott. In 2023, the reversal of that entry and the booking of the December 2023 entry reduced margins in 2023 by $6.6 million. The majority of those entries were related to power supply.
Ms. Kenny, what other factors impacted the operating loss, or which led to the, excuse me, let me restate that question. What other factors contributed to the operating, or to the net margin, to the net loss for 2023?
So as I indicated in responses to data requests, we had experienced increases in depreciation, significant increases in short-term debt interest expense, increases in contractor costs, increases in material costs, increases in payroll expenses, increases in just about every category year over year.
Ms. Kenny, if I could direct your attention to page 5 of Mr. Valcarengi's surrebuttal testimony, and specifically lines 7 through 11, where he discusses the unbilled revenues and the impact on 2022 and 2023 financial results. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
With respect to the unbilled revenue entry, Mr. Valcarengi states that Ms. Kennedy provides no analyses or documentation to support the amounts she presents in this area. Do you see that sentence?
Yes, I do.
How do you respond to that statement?
That is not a true statement. The unbilled entries are discussed in the financials, and I also provided additional evidence of the specifics of the unbilled entry in response to a data request.
When you say the unbilled revenue was discussed in the financials, are you referring to Smeco Exhibit number 8, which we just discussed?
I am, yes.
Could I ask you to please turn to page 10 of Smeco Exhibit number 8? Where on this page is there a reference to unbilled revenue?
Item L, revenue recognition.
Could you please read that for Your Honor?
Sure. Revenue is recognized as services rendered to customers. Recorded revenue includes an estimate of unbilled revenue for utility service rendered but not billed to customers as of year-end, which complies with the requirements of ASC Topic 606. Estimated unbilled revenue was approximately $22.1 million and $28.7 million as of December 31st, 2023 and 2022, respectively.
Ms. Kennedy, if you were to remove the impact of the $9.2 million increase to Smeco's margins in 2022, which is referenced in Mr. Valcarengi's surrebuttal testimony, what would the financial results have been for 2022?
We would have had net margins of approximately $3 million.
If you were to remove the impact of the $6.6 million decrease to Smeco's margins in 2023, what would the financial results have been for 2023?
We would have had net margins of approximately $4 million.
Turning your attention again to Mr. Valcarengi's testimony, Sir rebuttal testimony, on pages 4 to 5, he suggests that the cooperative says nothing about what occurred between 2022 and 2023 that resulted in payroll increases, interest expenses, and depreciation expenses. What is your response to that suggestion?
Again, I'm baffled given the information that we provided and the fact that we offered an opportunity to discuss with any parties and their representatives or witnesses regarding any questions they had about what may have occurred and the reasons for this filing. I just don't understand how this is not known.
I apologize, Your Honor. May I just ask counsel to tell me what page again he was on in the surrebuttal? I apologize.
Pages 4 to 5 of Mr. Valcarengi's rebuttal.
Okay, thank you so much.
And so, Ms. Kennedy, when Mr. Valcarengi talks about Smeco not providing any support for an increase in interest costs, could you discuss the type of support that Smeco provided throughout the course of discovery and in your testimony?
Sure. In numerous data requests, we provided the actual interest rate expense, short-term interest rate expense, and the increases, again, as I mentioned earlier, daily from 2021 through July of 2024, showing the significant increase in short-term interest rates over that period, as well as the increased utilization on the short-term lines of credit.
With respect to depreciation expense and an increase experienced in 2023 over 2022, can you discuss what types of information the cooperative provided to the parties through the course of discovery and in your testimony?
Sure. We provided the individual plant balance by plant account and the associated depreciation for each of those accounts, beginning with 2021 through 2023. In addition, I would add that in 2023, we moved our AMI regulatory asset into plant, which was an addition of $41 million. So that significantly increased our plant balance and our depreciation.
Mr. Valcarengi in his rebuttal testimony also questions whether the cooperative provided any support for its contention that payroll expense increased as between 22 and 2023. How do you respond to that statement?
Again, I provided payroll expense for, I believe it was 2021, 2022, and 2023 by type of expense and by specific income statement account.
Ms. Kennedy, did you ever have the opportunity to talk to Mr. Valcarengi about his concerns regarding the cooperative's financial results for 2023 and proposed adjustment?
I did not, in spite of the offer being extended to discuss any questions that may have been remaining. There was no call. I would have actually preferred to have a discussion as opposed to responding to multiple of the same data requests. But Mr. Valcarengi refused to take us up on our offer.
Are you aware of whether any other staff witnesses took the cooperative up on its offer to meet with them and discuss areas of the case for which they may have questions outside of discovery?
They did, yes, although I was not party to those conversations. Other parties did reach out and have discussions.
With respect to all of the discovery request responses that you previously reviewed and that have been admitted into the record in this proceeding, do those data request responses include some of the information that you just highlighted as being provided to staff and the other parties that explain the differences between the financial results for 2022 and 2023?
They do.
Direct your attention, Ms. Kennedy, to pages 27 to 28 of Mr. Valcarengi's rebuttal testimony. What does Mr. Valcarengi say about factoring in the return component of Smeco's Empower Maryland program and the proceeds from a life insurance policy in the development of distribution rates?
He accepts the Empower, but does not allow inclusion of the proceeds from the life insurance.
Could you explain how this life insurance policy distribution came about?
Sure. So we had an employee who we had provided a 457B and a 457F program for. This life insurance was put in place in part to recover the expenses associated with those plans. The employee left the company before he was vested in the life insurance, so those proceeds came to Smeco.
Did the employee pass away
He
after
did.
he left Smeco?
He did, yes.
Will the cooperative receive a benefit from this particular life insurance policy in a similar manner during the rate effective period or at any time in the future?
We will not.
Do you agree with Mr. Valcarengi that the one-time payment of a life insurance policy benefit should be used to set rates during the rate effective period?
I do not.
Okay, Your Honor, that's all the rejoinder questions I have for Ms. Kennedy. At this time, she is available for questioning by the other parties and Your Honor.
Thank you. Office of People's Counsel.
No questions, Your Honor.
The Department of the Navy. No questions, Your Honor. For staff.
Good morning, Ms. Kennedy. It was nice to meet you today,
Good morning.
and thank you for taking the time to appear. Ms. Kennedy, may I ask you, in this instant case, did Smeco choose the historic test year?
We did.
Ms. Kennedy, and during that historic test year, did Smeco experience a loss?
We did.
And Ms. Kennedy, I'm going to ask you a question. I know you're not an attorney, so it's just a general question. To the extent that you know generally, for rate-making purposes, in a historic test year case, does the Commission rely on actual data in the development of the revenue requirement? It's a general question.
I believe so.
And again, just generally, this is not a legal question, you're not an attorney, but generally, are you aware of any requirements that for rate-making purposes, the Commission, or does the Commission have, or is the Commission required, I'll start again. Generally, are you aware of any requirement that for rate-making purposes, the Commission must apply separate standards for a cooperative as opposed to an investor-owned utility?
I'm not sure I can answer that. I
Okay,
don't
that's
know.
fine. Ms. Kennedy, I'd like to ask you a question about, and I'm going to say it slowly for the court reporter, AFUDC. A as in apple, F as in Frank, U as in umbrella, D as in dessert, and C as in custard. So that's AFUDC is going to be in my question. Ms. Kennedy, does the manner in which AFUDC is recorded have a bearing on the DSC calculus?
It does. However, Smeco records AFUDC in a manner that is acceptable.
And that manner is acceptable according to what?
Under accounting standards. I don't know the specific standard.
That's okay. Thank you. I have a question about the DSC development, and if you would like us to ask witness Collette, I understand. I'm just going to go ahead and ask you, and then you can tell me whether you can answer it or not. Smeco witness Collette states in his direct, so I don't know if you want to answer this or we can, that the 2.0 DSC ratio that he used in his evaluation was provided by you, Ms. Kennedy. would you be able to describe how you determined that the 2.0 value for the DSE ratio and not another value was appropriate for this proceeding?
Yeah,
Your Honor, I'm going to object to that question. As she just indicated, Ms. Herman just indicated, Mr. Collette is actually here to testify today. It's his words and not her words.
Noting your objection, if you can answer, you can, but if you can't answer.
Could you repeat the question? I'm not sure I can, but.
Sure. Can you describe, can you describe how you determined that the 2.0 value for the DSE ratio and not another value was appropriate for this proceeding?
Objection, argumentative in the tone of the question itself, and that the question implies that the witness determined before she's even answered whether she determined that 2.0 is an appropriate DSE.
Sustained. If you can ask it, maybe break it down a little bit. If she knows.
Yeah, and again, we're just trying to find out if she knows. How did you come by the DSE ratio? How's that? We're not trying to argue with her. We just want to know how she got it, because it's in Colette's testimony that witness Kennedy provided it.
I really don't understand what's being asked.
How did you get to the DSE ratio of 2.0?
How did I get it?
Yes, ma'am. Where did it come from? Why is it appropriate?
Oh, that Mr. Collette is going to have to answer that question.
Okay. Thank you so much. I have more questions. Yeah, thank you so much. Oops, excuse me. So I'm going to ask you to pull out, going back to Smeco 8 on page 10.
Is this the financial statements?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Item L. Let me just pull up my question. Thank you. Pardon me for just 1 second. I'm just looking at my notes. Where are we talking about that? Okay, I believe it was your testimony that as far as number L, capital L on page 10, that's your support for the unbilled entries. Is that your testimony?
That's not correct.
Okay, I'm sorry. What is that support? The support for then? Can I ask you?
It was included with data request 48. I don't know which number.
Just to be clear, Your Honor, so I believe Ms. Herman's referring to Smeco Exhibit number 8, which is a response to data request number 5-15. Ms. Kennedy may be referring to responses to other data requests as well.
Okay. So, Ms. Kennedy, may I ask you to pull out Smeco 10, which is Smeco's response to data set 48-1. Can you, when you get there. Okay. So, where can you point, and this is a large amount of documentation, where the specific changes in the items that Mr. Valcarengi mentions in his testimony, the payroll expenses, the contractor costs, where can you point to the exact place in the document that shows the exact change from 2022 to 2023? And I can read back the place from, I believe that counsel read from Mr. Valcarengi's rebuttal. I'll go to the page.
And this was with respect to labor costs? or
Yes, I'm going to look at the page, and there's bottom page 3. Payroll expense, interest rates, interest expense, depreciation expense. Where in the document can you show us the exact change from 2022 to 2023? And please take your time.
The changes to depreciation are in attachment 2, 48-1 attachment 2.
I'm looking for it. I'm sorry.
That's
Thank you
okay.
so much. And again, the change from 22 to 23, ma'am. I'm looking for attachment 2 right now.
Yes.
Thank you.
So the worksheet includes the beginning balance for 2021.
I'm not there yet. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'll hurry up.
And I'm sorry, Your Honor, because I want to make sure I'm following along
Yeah,
as well.
as well.
Are you? I believe the question related to payroll expense, but I think that it sounds like we're being directed to a depreciation exhibit
Correct.
now.
And which specific issue? So let's just break it
Yes,
down.
depreciation. We'll start with depreciation.
Depreciation.
Yep, thank you.
And Witness Kennedy, was attachment 2 to 1-1,
48-1.
48-1.
I'm still looking for attachment 2. I'm sorry.
And is her question, I apologize, Your Honor, only relate to 48 because obviously we introduced a considerable amount of data requests, and so if she's only asking her question limited to 48, that would be helpful to know as well.
At this moment, I'm only asking about 48. Thank you, counsel. Sorry I wasn't clear. I'm still trying to find attachment 2, but in what was handed out. I'm in Smeco 10.
Correct. And so it's towards the beginning. That helps you.
Okay.
Attachment 2 is after response 48-1.
Great. Okay. I'm there now. Thank you. I've got to put my bright light on it, too. It's a little small.
It's in larger font behind, if you look behind the first sheet.
Okay. Okay. And can you show us where on the chart it shows the change from 2022 to 2023 in depreciation costs?
Well, I have the totals, by line item. They're not totaled, but it would have been easy enough to auto sum to get the totals by year.
And can you direct me maybe what line we're talking about or where you're getting it, what I should be looking at? Thank you, Ms. Kennedy.
So depreciation, the actual depreciation is in the columns that are highlighted blue.
Okay.
So anybody who wanted to get the totals by year would have auto-summed those columns and done a simple subtraction year over year.
Okay. So you would suggest that we auto sum. It looks like it's December 2021. Maybe
Yes,
I
there's
just can't
2021,
Okay.
2022, and 2023 were all provided.
Okay, so 2022 is on the next page. I
Yes.
see. Okay. Okay. And Ms. Kennedy, can you show us where in any of the documents that were entered into evidence, or your direct or your rebuttal, where there's the change from 2022 to 2023 for contractor costs?
Your Honor. I believe that part of the issue is that the printed pack did not actually include all of the attachments to 48-1 that were referenced as part of when the exhibit was entered into evidence by Your Honor, and so there are a couple attachments. We are going to provide electronic versions, again, because these are these are native files, and so I would ask that Your Honor allow us to provide those to you. We can do so now in electronic format to help move this along. All of the parties already have access to those attachments, both electronically in native format as well. And specifically, it's attachment.
3 is
Well, right now she's looking for attachment 3, and it's not there.
Correct.
But it looks like attachment 3, 4, 6, and 9 are not part of the printed packet right now. So I apologize for that.
And of which exhibit? I'm sorry.
It looks like that the printed packet unfortunately only
I understand.
includes attachment 2, or let's see, 1 and 2, I think.
And we're talking about contractor costs, the difference between contractor costs between 22 and 20.
So there's a
23.
reference to an attachment 3
and
here,
that's not included in
which
the
is
printed
not
pack.
which is not included in the printed packet. It will be in the electronic file.
And that was for which Smeco exhibit, Counsel?
This is
Exhibit 10.
48, the one 48.
I believe it's
Smeco exhibit, excuse me, Smeco exhibit number 10.
10, okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yeah, no
I
problem.
apologize. There's too many papers.
No problem.
We
It's a lot of
did admit
papers.
this, and this is Smeco exhibit number 11. I apologize. That's where all those references are. So, Ms. Kennedy, if you could direct your attention to Smeco exhibit number 11, which is Smeco's response to staff data request number 1 to all parties. That's where the reference attachments are. I apologize, Your Honor.
in the printed copy of Exhibit 11.
Which one is that? I'm sorry. It's
Exhibit 11, Attachment 3.
Thank you. And I believe my question is, can you show me where the documentation shows the difference between 2022 and 2023 for contractor costs?
So if you look, item 1-1, attachment 2, operating expenses below that chart, where it has customer accounts, customer service and information, administrative and general. Account 923, outside services, is contractor costs.
I'm so sorry, Ms. Kennedy, I'm not there yet.
Okay.
Thank you for your
Sure.
patience. Contractor costs, I'm attachment 3. I got to put my flashlight on again. Attachment 3. Put that flashlight on. I forgot my magnifying glass. Attachment 3.
What?
Attachment
She's
2.
referring to Attachment 2.
I
2
apologize.
pages forward right now, I believe.
Okay, and where should I see
On the lower chart, under administrative and general,
Yes, ma'am.
account 923, outside services, the difference is $1.4 million.
Okay, so attachment 2, outside services under administrative and general.
Correct.
How does that show us the difference of the contractor costs from 2022 to 2023?
That's the difference in contractor costs
Okay.
charged to account 923.
So all outside services would be contractor costs?
It's contract, correct. It doesn't include capital contractor costs, but it's all income statement contractor costs are here.
Your vendors, people who do stuff,
Correct.
build stuff for you.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Ms. Kennedy, may I ask you to show us where in any of the documentation, either your rebuttal, your direct, or any of the documents the council served today, the council introduced today, the difference in the interest costs, just from 22 to 23.
So same attachment on the prior page. Other interest, under interest expense,
Okay.
and interest on long-term debt. You can see the total $2.8 million.
Okay, thank you. And can you show me where in any of the documentation, your direct, your rebuttal, the exhibits, or any of the documents entered in evidence today, where we can find the difference in the payroll expenses from 2022 to 2023?
I would just let the record reflect that she referred to all of the documents, meaning all of your testimony, as well as all of the data requests that we discussed earlier today.
It's readily available here.
Thank you.
Attachment 4.
Thank you.
It shows the costs by year, payroll costs by year.
I'm looking for it. Thank you. Attachment 4. All right. And what you refer to as material costs, where can we find that change from 2022 to 2023? And as counsel just said, in any of your direct, your rebuttal, those exhibits, or the documents that were introduced into evidence today.
So attachment 9 shows increase in costs for certain materials. It's not fully inclusive, but it shows the 2021 cost, the 2022 cost, and the 2023 cost.
Attachment 9, like Niner, right?
Correct.
Thank you. I'm having a hard time finding it. I'm sorry.
It's the very end of the packet.
Very end. Okay. Thank you. Okay. It looks like.
That's it. Yeah.
And to just if you can just, we're almost done, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you for your patience. Just point to me again where it is.
If you look at the bottom, it sums the columns, and again, this is not every single material item that Smeco has. But if you look at the bottom of this list of 50, it will show you the cost in 2022 and 2023, and this is per item.
Okay, I see. It's hard to read. Anchor, John, single, helix. Okay. Arrestor, elbow. Okay, so all of these things are material costs.
Yes.
Okay. That's all my questions. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you.
Before redirect, I do have a couple questions. Ms. Kennedy, I'm going to direct your attention to what's attached, I believe, to staff witness Valcarengi's rebuttal as staff data request response number 47 with respect to AFUDC interest.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. Can you direct me to where that is?
Sure, it's attachment to rebuttal testimony of staff witness Valcarengi. And it's response to staff data request number 47.
Okay.
My question is a clarifying question about the interest rate that's being used to calculate the monthly accruals. In the data response, it looks like it says both short-term interest rates and long-term interest rates are being used to calculate the monthly averages for interest on AFUDC.
So that's correct. In the event that short-term interest outstanding is a higher value than the construction work in process value on which AFUDC is calculated, it only uses the short-term interest because it's assumed that since the line of credit balance is higher than the construction work in process balance, that entire QIP balance, construction work in process, is being funded with short-term debt.
Is that an assumption that's based into the program?
Yes,
That
correct.
does
Yes.
the calculation?
Yes.
And if you could just repeat that one more time for me.
Sure. So anytime the construction work in process balance on which AFUDC is calculated is a lower value than the outstanding balance on the lines of credit, it uses the assumption that the entire construction work in process balance is funded using that line of credit.
Now, and that's on a monthly basis, correct?
Correct.
Okay. The life insurance proceeds that were discussed earlier, and I believe you discussed on page 50 and 51 of your rebuttal testimony, were there ratepayer funds used to fund the premiums that when the policy was issued?
We only have ratepayer funds.
Okay, so so those premiums were paid out of
Correct.
ratepayer funds. Is the amount of those premiums referenced anywhere in your any of the
They are not.
testimony or exhibits?
They are not, no. I can
I will.
get them if you'd like.
I would request that.
Okay.
That would be bench data request
Sure.
number 2.
And I'm sorry, Your Honor, it just, so we respond accordingly. You're looking for the premiums paid for that policy?
For that policy.
Okay.
With respect to the bench data request number 1 that was issued and the establishment of the regulatory asset request, how does the estimated liability of the $49 million that's in your testimony at the end of December of 23 relate to the $16.455 million balance in account? I believe it's 228.3 in Smeco's annual report.
Account 228 is post-retirement benefits, so that is actually retiree medical and not pension.
So they're 2 different things.
They are.
How long has Smeco been aware of the accumulated amounts for that regulatory asset?
I mean, it's been on our balance sheet for years. I think it was, I believe 2008, it increased significantly. But it varies year to year.
And if I understand correctly, those amounts will be determined once the IRS letter is issued?
Yeah, the final amount will be determined based on the market conditions, the interest rates, and any associated expense for termination at the time.
And if I understand correctly, the expenses that are incurred that lead to that $49 million or so estimate, those are just outstanding. They just accrue without payment and accrue interest as the years go on?
There's no interest, no.
Okay.
They're gains and losses associated with the pension plan that occur during the course of the year that are put on the balance sheet and amortized over the course of the pension plan.
Thank you. With respect to the adjustment made by staff and Office of People's Counsel for the $50,000 bonus that was issued by Smeco's board, can you explain to me how that would benefit customers?
Well, Smeco has very few options for recruitment, retention. So I would say that to the extent that we can implement something like a modest bonus for a CEO or any other executive employee for that matter, I think it does help the customers, the members. We need to get talent. We need capable, qualified talent at Smeco.
Do you know how often the board elects to issue such bonuses?
I think they review it every year. They review the potential for a bonus every year.
And is it based on performance metrics?
I'm not privy to the board decisions for CEO bonus.
Was one a CEO bonus issued in 2022?
I believe it was.
Do you know how much that one was?
I don't know for certain. I can get it for you.
Okay, that'll be bench data request number 3, and I would like to know for the last 5 years.
Okay.
Bonuses issued for CEO. And the basis for the board's vote to implement any of those bonuses. So whether it's performance-based, metrics-based, how they make that determination. That'll That'll be bench data request number 3. It's a clarifying question about I believe it's adjustment 16, which reflects benefits for senior level employees, otherwise known as SERP. I believe you discussed it in page 48 of your rebuttal.
Okay.
I'm just trying to get there. One moment. I have 2 Adobes open.
It's pages 47 and 48, Your Honor.
Yes.
You're looking for it.
And, yep, there we go. Almost there. I just would like to clarify, in your testimony, I believe you said there was, the amount was $67,932
That's right, in the test year.
in the test year. Can you explain to me, I don't know that the comparison chart was admitted into the record, but there was a comparison chart that was circulated. Does Ms. Kennedy have?
I have a copy I can give to her if that would be helpful.
That would, thank you.
I should. Well, I know I might You're going to need glasses.
It's small. It's very small.
Thank you.
So if you go down to, it's adjustment 16 on the comparison chart. Can you explain to me the difference between the amount reflected in your rebuttal testimony as to what was actually spent on those benefits? Just for my understanding, where your testimony states that it was $67,932, I don't see that reflected in the comparison chart.
So, and I'm going to try and answer, and if I don't
Okay.
get it right, let me know. So, in the test year, $67,932 was the amount of SERP expense. That applied to 7 employees, one of which who left during the course of the year. Beginning January 1, 2024, there were 11 employees added to that program that will increase the cost going forward.
So $67,932 is the actual amount.
Correct.
And the adjustment that you're making, that you're reflecting, is to reflect the 11 employees going forward that began after January 1st of 2024.
That's right.
And the adjusted amount was the 360?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mhm.
With respect to adjustment 5, which I believe is for non-bargaining unit costs, labor costs,
Mhm.
changed from your direct to your rebuttal, can you clarify the basis for the change?
It was an error in the calculation, and I'd have to go back to my spreadsheet, but it was simply the formula was incorrect.
Your Honor, we did provide detailed work papers that do explain that correction of the error. We're happy to, we did not produce it as part of the data request packets, but certainly can provide it if Your Honor
Yes,
would like
that will
it.
be bench data request. I believe we are up to 4. Yes. change. Data request 4 will be the worksheet supporting paperwork for adjustment 5 relating to non-bargaining unit labor costs. I think that concludes my questions.
Thank you, Your Honor. I do have just a few on redirect. Ms. Kennedy, staff counsel asked you about the test year selected for this proceeding. Why is a calendar year beneficial for a test year?
Smeco's fiscal year is on a calendar year, and that means we start with audited financials, which should give the parties comfort that what we're starting with has actually been audited and is free of material misstatements.
Ms. Herman also asked you about reliance upon actual financial information during the test year period. In rate making, is it common to adjust the test year to reflect what the cooperative in this case is likely to experience during the rate effective period?
I think it's necessary to do that. Otherwise, there's not much point in a rate case.
Ms. Herman asked you about depreciation expense, in particular as it related to the financial results for calendar years 2022 and 2023. Did the cooperative produce information on its additions to plant for 2023?
We did.
If capital expenditures increase, what happens to depreciation expense?
Depreciation expense increases, which in turn decreases margins.
Were there any significant capital expenditures in 2023?
The regulatory asset for the AMI meters were capitalized as part of the previous rate case, so there was approximately $41 million in addition to the normal capital work that went into plant for 2023.
Did the cooperative provide any details about its capital spending for 2023?
We did. We provided information on specific projects. I provided the information on plant account by line item, by specific plant account. So there was a lot of information on depreciation and assets provided.
Did staff have the opportunity to review the specific plant additions that the cooperative made during 2023?
They did.
Objection. I'm sorry, it's too late. I'm sorry. I don't know how council can know, or they can know what opportunities we have, but I guess I waited too late.
Ms. Kenny, referring you again to Smeco Exhibit 8, which are the audited financial statements for 2022 and 2023, is there information in these audited financial statements regarding annual depreciation expense?
There is.
Referring you, Ms. Kennedy, to Smeco Exhibit 9, and the single attachment that was provided as a representation as to what a monthly financial statement looks like. Is there information contained in these monthly reports about depreciation expense?
Yes. There's depreciation listed every month.
And how many such monthly reports were provided to staff in this proceeding?
At least 24.
I'll note that if you could look to the second page of Smeco's response to item number 512, did the cooperative also provide monthly financial information for 2024?
We did.
What has happened with respect to depreciation expense in 2024?
It's increased even further over 2023.
Ms. Herman also asked you about interest expense. If I could direct your attention to Smeco Exhibit number 10 and attachment number 1 to item number 48-1. If you could just look up when you get there, please.
I'm sorry, which attachment?
Attachment 1 to item number 48-1. What is that?
That is the day. This chart lists the daily short-term interest on Smeco's lines of credit for each day in 2021, 2022, 2023, and year-to-date 2024.
If I could turn your attention to staff data request 48-2, which is also contained within Smeco Exhibit number 10, and specifically 48-2 attachment 1. What is this?
These are the consolidated statements of revenue and expenses in detail.
If I could direct your attention to item number 48-4 of Smeco Exhibit 10. And Ms. Herman specifically asked you about contractor costs. What is contained within Smeco's response to 48-4?
So this includes our specific contractors and the increases in the contracts we have with them post-COVID. So some of them are from 2020 to 2024, some of them are from 2019 to 2024, depended on when the contract needed to be renewed. But these are the increases in prices that we've seen.
And if I could now refer you to Smeco Exhibit 13 and specifically Smeco's response to item number 2-6, which is referenced in item number 48-4. And when you get to that, if you could look up.
I'm sorry, where was that?
I apologize. It's Smeco Exhibit 13, item number 2-6. It's the first data request that's included in that packet. Ms. Kennedy, what does this data request response discuss with respect to contractor costs?
This is also the increase in contractor costs from 2019 to 2024, again, depending on the date of the contract renewal and the type of contractor.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Your Honor. I'm still back at 48-4, trying to find that. I need to ask him to repeat where he's asking the witness to look, and I apologize for the inconvenience.
So right now, happy to repeat myself.
Sorry.
Right now, the witness is on Smeco exhibit number 13.
Okay.
And she was discussing the first data request response included in that packet, which is item number 2-6.
Okay, thank you.
If I could direct your attention to item number 5-1 in that same packet, which was entered into evidence as Smeco exhibit number 13, and specifically attachment 1. What is that?
Again, this is the short-term interest rate and the outstanding balance on those lines of credit for 2022, 2023, and 2024.
And what does the information provided in this attachment show with respect to the cooperative's short-term interest expense?
Well, it shows that in January of 2022, we were paying 2.45% interest on our lines of credit, and in January of 2024, on that same line of credit, we were paying 7.25%. In addition, the total balances on our lines of credit have increased.
Ms. Kennedy, Judge Burke asked you about AFUDC. Are there any additional funds available to draw on the cooperative's long-term debt?
There are not. Our long-term debt was issued in 2022 and used to pay down the short-term lines of credit.
Is the cooperative currently using any long-term debt to finance capital projects for which AFUDC applies?
We are not.
Judge Burke also asked you about the life insurance policy that produced proceeds during the test year. Does the cooperative have shareholders?
We do not.
How did the cooperative utilize the proceeds from this life insurance policy?
They offset margins, so they were used for, the cash was used for normal daily co-op work.
Is there any possibility that the life insurance policy for which benefits were paid could produce additional benefits in the future?
There is none. The employee is deceased and the funds were paid out.
Judge Burke also asked you about the $50,000 bonus that was paid to the cooperative CEO for 2023, and specifically referenced the cooperative's board of directors. Could you talk about the board of directors and who is on the board of directors?
Sure. So the board of directors consists of 15 directors who are members of the cooperative and elected by members of the cooperative.
And was it this board composed of customers that made a determination on whether to grant the CEO a bonus for 2023?
It was.
Your Honor, that's all the questions I have for this witness. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's 11:05. I'm going to ask, we're going to take a break for about 10 minutes before going. I believe we can start. The next witness would be Mr. Collette. And we're going to take a 10-minute break right now. Thank you. We
Thank
go
you.
off the record.
Yeah, I'll bring some up. Oh, there's 3. Right? Yeah, enough for now. Right.
Okay, thank you. Can we go back on the record?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I believe Smeco will be calling their next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to call Mr. William Collette to the stand, please. He's already there.
I'm here.
That was fast.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the testimony that you're about to give?
I do.
Hey, could you please state and spell your first and last name?
Sure. It's William A. Collett, Collet, and I go by Bill.
And could you state your address for us, please?
Sure. The address is 4151 North Mulberry in Kansas City, Missouri, 64116.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Collette. Would you please tell us by whom you are employed?
I'm employed as president of Collett and Associates, LLC.
Do you have before you the prepared direct testimony of William A. Collette in this case, dated May 1, 2024, consisting of 32 pages and 2 exhibits?
I do.
Do you also have the prepared rebuttal testimony of William A. Collette in this case, dated July 19, 2024, consisting of 26 pages and 1 exhibit?
I do.
Are these the testimonies and exhibits you're sponsoring in this case?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any changes to these testimonies or exhibits?
No, I don't.
If I asked you the same questions today as are set forth in these testimonies, would your answer be the same?
Yes, it would.
Are these answers true to the best of your information, knowledge, and belief?
Yes, sir.
Do you now adopt these testimonies and exhibits as your own in this proceeding?
I do.
Your Honor, I would like to have marked as Smeco Exhibit 14 the prepared direct testimony of William A. Collette, and I ask that it be admitted into evidence.
Is there any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay. The direct testimony of Mr. Collett will be entered into the record as Smeco's Exhibit 14.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would also like marked as Smeco Exhibit 15 the prepared rebuttal testimony of William A. Collette in this case.
Okay. Is there any objection to the admission of that testimony?
No objection, Your Honor.
The rebuttal testimony of Mr. Collett will be marked and entered into the record as Smeco's Exhibit 15.
Thank you, Your Honor. And Mr. Collette is now available for cross-examination.
Office of People's Counsel.
I apologize. No questions at this time, Your Honor.
Department of the Navy.
No questions, Your Honor.
Technical staff.
Good morning, Mr. Collett. I'm Michael Dean, one of the staff attorneys, and thank you for coming all this way to provide your testimony.
Well, thank you for having me. Do I get a crab cake out of it?
Turning to page 5 of your direct testimony, Exhibit 14. At the bottom, question and answer, in the second sentence of the response, it says, Smeco has determined that a 2.00 DSC ratio, which is the debt service coverage ratio, should be used to establish its revenue requirement. Is it correct that this came from company witness Kennedy?
The 2.00 was developed collaboratively based on data and Smeco staff
The 2.00 was approved by the Smeco member-elected board of directors, and so it's kind of a collaborative effort. But where it shows up is in Ms. Kennedy's testimony in the exhibit BK1.
Thank you. And were you part of the collaboration on that?
I was.
Thank you. Beyond comparison to other cooperative debt service coverage ratios, what else was considered in selecting 2.0 as the value for this?
Well, there were quite a few criteria, if you will. The overarching desire is to have a debt service coverage ratio that ensures Smeco's financial health, ensures its ability to invest in its utility system, provide safe and reliable power, and be able to compete with the other consumers of debt in the market, to be competitive in the market, to ensure access to debt capital, a reasonable basis, and even in times where debt markets may be stressed, because unlike an investor-owned utility, long-term debt is the only source of capital available to an electric cooperative. You can't go out to the market and sell stock. So access to long-term debt and the debt markets is really critical to an electric co-op to be able to invest in its system.
And on the next page, at line 3, you state that you endorse this value for the debt service coverage ratio.
I do.
Thank you. That's covered. And at line 4 on page 6, you state that this is to establish a just and reasonable revenue requirement in this proceeding?
Yes.
Is it, when you say that, is it because the total of the revenue requirement reflects the 2.00 debt service coverage ratio?
Yes. For clarification, I'm focused on the debt service coverage ratio and what that produces as a revenue requirement.
Thank you. Going down to line 14, you state that this debt service coverage ratio would rebuild credit metrics to a level that would restore financial health and continued access to long-term debt capital. How long after the issuance of a order approving, assuming that it did approve a 2.00 debt service coverage ratio, would it take to restore financial health?
Well, the financial health is established by what margins are reported in the future based on that just and reasonable 2.0 debt service coverage. So you're going to have a ramp going into the future where you're actually establishing results that are consistent with that just and reasonable 2.0 debt service coverage. Typically, from a credit metric standpoint, Smeco's reviewed annually. That's when the lenders see the annual results. The rating agencies typically do an update annually after the financial results for the previous year are in the bag. So I'd say starting after the financial results reflecting that 2.00 are published is when you would begin to see positive comments about rebuilding credit metrics.
Thank you very much. If there was a debt issuance by the cooperative, would that immediately lower the debt service coverage ratio as considered by the lenders?
Not immediately upon the issuance. The debt service coverage ratio denominator is billed debt service. So just having it outstanding doesn't mean that you've paid any interest or paid any principal. It's when you start paying the principal and the interest on that new debt that the denominator actually affects the debt service coverage ratio.
Thank you for that clarification. Going down to line 17 on page 6, you state that 2.00 is actually below the level that could be supported in this proceeding. What's
Yes.
the highest level of the debt service coverage ratio that could be supported in you?
Well, certainly I've provided graphically in the rebuttal and tabularly in the direct what higher data suggests. So that's the basis of my statement that a number above 2.00 could have been supported as just and reasonable, because the data from the 5 separate peer groups that we looked at and analyzed actual peers within 5 different peer groups, all of that has been graphically presented, and that data is above what Smeco is asking for at 2.00. Since I wasn't asked to provide a professional opinion above 2.00, how high could it go is kind of speculation.
Thank you. On page 7 of your direct testimony, at line 18, you note that 2.00 for the debt service coverage ratio is below the comparative return on rate base allowed for rate making for the investor-owned utilities. Why is it appropriate that you would compare financial data from a nonprofit rural electric cooperative with an investor-owned utility which has to pay dividends?
Well, I think there's probably 3 different components to that answer. The first is that electric utilities, whether they be IOU or cooperative, compete in the same capital, the debt capital markets. So in other words, there aren't pension funds and lenders that say, I only lend to co-ops, I don't buy investor-owned utility bonds. So in the private placement market, which Smeco has increasingly utilized, those same buyers of Smeco bonds would also be buying investor-owned utility bonds. The second element is that in both an investor-owned utility and a co-op, there needs to be some margin earned above, you can't have a zero margin in a co-op. You need debt service coverage, you need the ability to retain and invest in your system. So the concepts are very similar. And what I was doing in defining 2 regulated peer groups of investor-owned utilities, the first one being the Maryland jurisdictional investor-owns, and then the other PJM rural, very comparable investor-owned utilities, was basically asked the question, what have commissions found for, investor-owned utilities that serve rural territory like Smeco? What have they determined is just and reasonable? I thought that data would be informative, and more data typically is better if you're trying to create a robust set of data points to support a professional conclusion. So I wanted to look at the IOUs because you have jurisdiction, awards of just and reasonable for IOUs happening throughout that PJM peer group. And the last rate case was, I thought, a good indicator of what other jurisdictions have found as just and reasonable.
Thank you. Turning to page 10, at lines 5 through 10, in your answer here, you explained that a new debt issuance requires a prospective pro forma calculation of the debt service coverage ratio as if the new debt issuance was outstanding. Does this statement mean that the end of year 2023 Smeco debt service coverage ratio of 1.31 might preclude a successful debt issuance?
Yes, I haven't done the calculation to say what is that break-even point, but yes, that's what the intent of the statement was, is even though you were above the 1.25 minimum for 2023, the indenture, which governs the ability to issue new debt, requires a prospective test, and so any significant amount of new long-term debt might bust that 1.25 minimum.
Thank you. Turning to page 14, line 6. And continuing on to page 15, line 8. This section right here, you describe Smeco's relative uniqueness among rural electric cooperatives. Which of the elements you use to describe the cooperative's uniqueness would cause the most difficulty to creditors in consideration of participating in a debt offering?
Probably from a credit perspective, so I'm going to put my bond buyer hat on, right? Concern about timely recovery of cost, in other words, regulatory lag, because Smeco is rate regulated here in Maryland, and so few electric cooperatives in the country are rate regulated. So there is a heightened degree of concern about the regulatory climate for a rate-regulated Smeco versus not a self-regulated, autonomous, rate authority cooperative. So I think that's probably number one on the list of the things that would differentiate Smeco versus other, sellers of bonds in the marketplace.
Thank you very much. On page 15, at line 12, you state that Smeco is large enough in total debt capitalization to push the upper limits or exceed the single borrower or credit limits of industry lenders like CFC and CoBank. Does that mean that Smeco can only use other sources of credit and not partially use CoBank or CFC?
Well, let me back up just a little bit. You asked me about what makes Smeco different, right? one of the other big things that makes Smeco different is the size of its balance sheet. It has a lot more utility plant investment than the average cooperative out there. And it has transmission that it owns, which most distribution cooperatives do not. So the capitalization, the amount of debt that Smeco has to have access to, is very large and unique among the 815 or so distribution cooperatives. And so when you look at the two principal non-governmental industry lenders, which are CFC and CoBank, right, they're used to having smaller balances outstanding to a single borrower. It's the single issuer credit risk issue that they have to address. And so unlike most cooperatives that could borrow everything they need from CoBank and CFC, that's why Smeco, needing more capital, has gone to the private placement, the debt market, like, competing with IOUs for selling bonds to traditional electric utility bond purchasers. So it doesn't mean that they're out of business with CFC or CoBank, but it does mean that there is a very heightened scrutiny about what Smeco can borrow on a direct loan basis from CFC and CoBank because of the amount they already have outstanding with CFC and CoBank.
When any of the debt that Smeco may still have from CFC or CoBank comes due, does that mean that it has to be replaced with private lenders?
I'm not exactly sure what the current position of either CFC or CoBank is in terms of credit availability of direct loans to Smeco. So I don't really know what the current situation would be. That would be more the Smeco staff that actually has those discussions and relationships and has direct information with CFC and CoBank.
Thank you. Turning to page 18, at lines 10 and 11, again talking about the size of Smeco's total debt, you state it is at or near the top of the single credit borrower list. Is that an actual list of different cooperatives?
It is not a list. It would be a policy at either CFC or CoBank as to what the maximum exposure to any one specific borrower would be. So it would be an internal risk management policy at CFC and CoBank.
Thank you for that clarification. Now I'm going to ask you to turn to page 22. And this is discussing the regulated cooperative peer group. And the top two listings for Virginia are Northern Virginia Electric Cooperative, and I hope I'm saying this right, Rappahannock.
It's Rappahannock. And they actually have in Virginia Rappahannock oysters. So that's the way most people hear the word Rappahannock. It's a river, and there are oysters in Virginia from the Rappahannock.
Electric Cooperative. And then down below it lists Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative. And they have roughly the same number of customers, correct?
Yes.
And then turning on to page 27. For this table, you list at the on the right-hand side the pro forma debt service coverage ratios for the different cooperatives. And for Northern Virginia, you've got 2.72. I'm not going to say that. Rappahannock has 2.02. And for the Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative, you would be requesting 2.00. In your experience, do larger cooperatives tend to have higher debt service coverage ratios? Because I notice it's these three would be the highest or the largest of all the electric cooperatives, and all of them, these three would have the highest debt service coverage ratios.
I don't know that there is a correlation between size and debt service coverage. I haven't seen it in testimony or in regulatory orders that there's some factor of size that correlates to debt service coverage. I think it just happens to be the product of this data.
For the Northern Virginia Electric Cooperative, having a 2.72 debt service coverage ratio, would there be, what sort of issues might come about to having such a high debt service coverage ratio?
Objection is calling for the witness to speculate.
Well, I would think in his past experience advising different electric cooperatives regarding their debt service coverage ratio, that he should be able to answer the question.
I would agree, overruled.
I believe that debt service coverage ratio is on a consolidated basis, and I believe that Northern Virginia has some other subsidiaries that are not in the electric distribution business that are very successful.
Thank you. Turning to your rebuttal testimony. Going to page 12. At line 11, you indicate that the Goodwin formula can be somewhat useful as a tool in certain circumstances. Under what circumstances have you previously used the Goodwin formula, if you have, in evaluation of an appropriate debt service collection ratio?
Excuse me, Your Honor, may I ask the reference in his rebuttal testimony?
Oh, page 12,
Page
line
12,
11.
Line 11, yes.
So I have never, in my professional opinion, working on rate cases, ever proposed the use of the Goodwin formula to establish a cost of equity capital. I do peer group analysis and data. That's my approach. I have never used it. And although I do recognize, and I went back and reviewed the Chop Tank case 9368 that I footnote on the next page, so I refresh my memory as to what the commission said in that particular case. I know of no other jurisdiction anywhere in the country that uses the Goodwin formula as a part of the determination of a just and reasonable revenue requirement.
Thank you. On page 15 of your testimony, at lines 10 through 12, one of your criticisms of our staff witness for our proposed debt service coverage ratio is that his calculation does not provide for incremental growth in equity capital above what is required to fund asset acquisitions? Do you see that as a fatal flaw?
Well, let me back up again to the prior page. I recognize that the commission in Maryland, based on that chop tank decision, has thought that the debt service coverage ratio that comes out of a Goodwin formula calculation is useful. I don't use it because I think there are better metrics. When you get into the specifics of the Goodwin formula, I have a number of concerns about what it produces as a result, and that's one of the reasons I don't use it. And I could go through what I don't like about it, if you would like, but generally, you're a prisoner of the data inputs, and you're using only historical data inputs, which doesn't give you a dynamic enough, in my view, calculation, which is why I go back to actually regulatory proceedings. What have commissions on the last rate case determined as just and reasonable? What are lender expectations from the industry peer group? What is the CFC defined peer group results? Because that really sets the expectations in the market for access to cost-effective and continuous access to long-term debt capital.
Based on that, in your next paragraph on page 15 from lines 13 through about 20, you list several capital projects that the cooperative has recently completed. Since the Goodwin formula has a growth factor element in its calculation, and these projects were completed in the past few years, wouldn't the current Goodwin formula's results contemplate additional equity being resulting from the DSC ratio?
Goodwin doesn't generate a DSC ratio. It was developed way back in the 70s to estimate the cost of equity in an electric cooperative. Okay? So Goodwin doesn't give you DSC. Goodwin gives you an estimate of the cost of equity. Then you go to put that into a weighted average capital, a WACC calculation. And then you take that and apply it to rate base, and that gives you returns, and then you divide the returns by the debt service, and that's how you get DSC out of Goodwin. So it's not the Goodwin formula that's actually giving you DSC.
Thank you. My mistake. Just a few final items. Turning to page 19, you note that the cooperative has a current credit rating of BBB+. Is it true that this is from several years ago?
When Smeco did the indenture and went for its first rating from Fitch Ratings was BBB+, and it hasn't changed since then.
Do rural electric cooperatives tend to obtain credit agency ratings for their debt issuances?
It would be necessary if you were going to the private placement market, because those investors in those bonds can only buy investment rated, which means you have to have a rating. If you're borrowing from RUS and CoBank and CFC exclusively, there's no requirement to have a credit rating.
Can I just follow up, because I'm not sure, just with the response, I believe the question was, do rural co-ops typically get credit ratings?
Typically, no.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Turning to page 20, at your question and answer, starting at line 7, near the bottom of that first paragraph of your answer, it states that members of the cooperative would have no issue with having a higher debt service coverage ratio as the cooperative member margin earned from rates are assigned to patronage capital accounts. Do you see any issues in that customers would be paying slightly higher electric rates in order to obtain this?
Well, my testimony is that 2.00 DSC is just and reasonable and what's necessary for the financial health of Smeco. And that benefits members directly in having the ability to invest in the system, provide safe, reliable power, access to debt capital markets even in times of turmoil. That's the benefit to the member, if you will. And what I'm saying in my testimony is that 2.00 is the level that delivers that benefit to the member and is deemed just and reasonable in my opinion.
Thank you. Turning to page 23 in your responses to the Office of People's Counsel testimony, at the table at the top of the page, rebuttal table WAC-7, you list the debt service coverage ratio for the cooperative for the years 2017 through 2023. Yet none of these are close to being 2.00. Could you comment on whether 2.00 is actually required given the past debt service coverage ratios?
I believe that 2.00 is required, and the fact that historically, which is what Mr. Lako in his testimony really, I think, relies on pretty heavily in determining his recommendation of 1.85. What I'm saying is the just and reasonable peer group data analysis suggests that something even above 2 could be deemed reasonable. But I think in the current environment, you need to start at 2 if you're planning to report based on regulatory lag of cost recovery and inflation. If you want to be reporting in the 1.8, 1.9 range, you probably need to start at 2, which was part of what influenced my discussion of why I think 2.00 is the right DSC ratio for Smeco.
Thank you very much for your testimony and for coming here.
Thank you.
Your Honor, I have a few questions for redirect.
Do you want to wait until you hear my question, or would you rather?
I was actually on the edge of my seat waiting for your question. So
I just have really one. You testified in Smeco's last case, correct? Case number 9688.
Yes, Your
Honor,
Honor,
was
I
their
did.
last rate case, and it was a little less than 2 years ago. At that time, your recommendation for the debt service coverage ratio was 1.85. Do you recall that?
In that case, I determined that Smeco's request of 1.85 was just and reasonable. A little, slightly different, maybe, characterization. I was only asked in that past rate case to give my opinion as to what they asked for, 1.85. Was that just and reasonable? And I think if you actually go back to the testimony in that case, I said that a higher number could be justified, but they didn't ask for it. So my opinion was only to the extent of my professional opinion that what they asked for, 1.85, was just and reasonable in that last case.
So is your recommendation based on what Smeco is asking you? Is it's I guess initiated by their determination, and then whether or not, in your opinion, it's just and reasonable. So they're giving you the debt service coverage ratio and asking whether it's reasonable.
Well, I think I referred to it as a collaborative process, and I think that really does kind of illustrate how we got to 2.00. In this case, we had 3 new peer group analyses that we didn't have in the last case, okay? And it was pretty compelling information. When we looked at regulated cooperatives, now granted there are only 3 states on the whole eastern seaboard that regulate electric cooperatives. But when we looked at the actual decisions in those rate-regulated cases, it made a pretty compelling case to go up to 2.00. And then when we looked at investor-owned utilities, especially the rural PJM IOU peer group, I found that to be truly influential in saying that I thought 2.00 was the right place to go in this rate case. And we didn't have that information in the last one.
Thank you. Please go ahead. Redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Collett, at the beginning of the cross-examination by Mr. Dean, he asked you about comparing debt service coverage to other cooperatives. Should the debt service coverage be determined just by looking at other cooperatives?
I find using the implied debt service coverage, looking at the return on rate base of investor-owned utilities, very helpful. I like more data, okay? I'm a numbers nerd. The more data I've got, the better I feel. So I did look outside of just the cooperative world, and I think that's appropriate.
Well, staff also asked why compare to investor-owned utilities, Smeco's debt service coverage. In your experience, when other jurisdictions set a rate of return on rate base, do they consider the utility's ability to compete effectively for debt capital?
I think it's a kind of holistic approach, much the same as, debt service coverage ratio that we determine is just and reasonable for Smeco. But I think that in the return on rate base calculation, you're also looking at the ability to attract equity capital. Yes, you're definitely looking at debt and the ability to, raise debt capital at a competitive rate, but you're also looking at equity.
Mr. Collett, at the end of Mr. Dean's cross-examination, he referred you to page 23 of your rebuttal testimony. If a 2.0 DSC is set as part of this case for Smeco, would Smeco's actual DSC be 2.0 if you account for regulatory lag?
No. I mean, that's part of the argument that I made in my rebuttal testimony. Given inflation and the environment we're in is still inflationary and regulatory lag, you would expect that actual reported results would be below what you set in a rate case initially.
So, taking that another step, would a DSC of 2.0, if it were set in this case, be the effective DSC during the rate effective period?
Well, if you set it and then you're looking at the rate effective period, what you actually report would not be 2.00.
It would be higher, lower?
You would expect it to be lower because your cost of service is going up. You're borrowing more money, which means more interest expense. Those kind of factors are going to mean that your reported DSC is going to be below the target that you set your rates on during a rate case.
During the discourse between you and Mr. Dean, Chop Tank Electric Cooperative came up. How does Smeco differ from Chop Tank?
Well, the most significant difference is that Chop Tank exited regulation by this commission. And so Chop Tank has autonomous rate authority where its member-elected board of directors determines its rates, whereas Smeco is rate regulated. That's probably the biggest difference between the two.
So Smeco is the only Maryland headquartered rate regulated cooperative in Maryland.
Yes.
Are there policy and regulatory expectations to meet the demands of customer needs in Maryland? Are they any different between cooperatives and investor-owned utilities?
This is probably a little beyond my focus, but from discussions with Smeco over the years, it's been my understanding that there is no different set of rules for policies, programs, procedures for Smeco being an electric cooperative rather than Delmarva or Baltimore Gas and Electric. It's been my understanding that those policy, programs, procedures, requirements are the same.
We talked about the 2.0 DSC in your discussion with Mr. Dean. If the commission set the debt service coverage at 1.75 as staff suggests, accounting for regulatory lag and increased costs, more debt, would you expect the actual debt service coverage to be below 1.75?
Yes, I would.
You were asked by Mr. Dean and the judge whether co-ops typically get a credit rating. Why don't co-ops typically get a credit rating?
They don't need to, and it's an expensive process. They don't need to borrow from CFC CoBank and the Rural Utility Service, the government. It's when you go outside of those three traditional cooperative lenders that you need a credit rating to be able to go to the bond market. There are a few electric cooperatives that because they might participate in a power market might have a credit rating to support the collateral requirements and the credit metrics of being a member of that market. But they're not very many of those.
Does the size of a cooperative matter in in its desire or need to get a credit rating?
Well, the larger cooperatives are the ones that typically, from a capital access perspective, are the ones that wind up getting credit ratings. Yes. So it's kind of a cause and effect, really.
And the last question I have for you, is it a good thing for customers if Smeco has access to lenders beyond CFC and CoBank?
Well, I think it's a requirement. It's beneficial because I think we've probably seen the maximum amount of debt out of CFC and CoBank that we're going to see. And so therefore, to be able to invest in the utility plant, to be able to make, investments for safe, reliable power, to meet the growth needs of the customer base, you got to go somewhere. And that's going to be the debt markets, the private placement markets, more so than what you would find in the average co-op.
Thank you, Mr. Collett. And Your Honor, I have no more redirect.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Collett. I think next up in the order of witnesses that was presented is Staff Witness McAuliffe.
Yes, Your Honor. Staff calls its witness McCall.
Okay, and my proposal at this point is to break around 1 o'clock for about half hour to break for lunch, and then we can resume after that. So we'll see how far we get with Mr. McAuliffe.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the testimony that you're about to give? I do. Hey, could you please state and spell your first and last name?
Drew McCullough, E-R-E-W-M-C-A-U-L-I-F-F.
Hey, could you tell us your business address, please?
6 St. Paul Street, Baltimore, Maryland.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. McCullough. Could you state your position here at the Public Service Commission?
The Director of Electricity Division.
Thank you. Do you have before you a document entitled The Direct Testimony and Exhibits of Drew M. McCullough dated July 3, 2023, consisting of approximately 20 pages and exhibits?
I do.
Was this document prepared by you or under your supervision?
I prepared the document.
Do you have any corrections or changes to the testimony as written in the document?
I do not.
Thank you. Your Honor, staff would like to mark this as Staff Exhibit Number 1.
Okay, so marked.
You also have a document entitled The Sir Rebuttal Testimony of Drew M. McCullough, dated July 31, 2024, consisting of 11 pages with no attachments.
I do.
And was this also prepared by you or under your supervision?
I prepared the document, yes.
For this document, do you have any changes or corrections to the testimony?
I do not.
Thank you. Staff would like to mark this as Staff Exhibit Number 2.
So marked.
Staff would like to move Exhibits Number 1 and 2 into the administrative record.
Is there any objection?
No objection.
Okay. The direct testimony of Drew McAuliffe will be entered into the record as Staff's Exhibit 1, and the Sir Rebuttal testimony of Drew McAuliffe will be marked and entered into the record as Staff's Exhibit 2.
Thank you, Your Honor. Staff's witness is available for cross-examination.
Office of People's Counsel. Department of the Navy.
I have no questions, Your Honor.
Company?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. McAuliffe, you recommend a 1.75 debt service coverage ratio for Smeco. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You use the Goodwin formula as the tool to arrive at or guide your recommendation, correct?
That's correct.
If you refer to your direct testimony, please, at page 7. I direct your attention to lines 8 through 11.
Mhm.
Is it there that you provide the proper numerator and denominator for the debt service coverage ratio?
Yes.
When I read your testimony, I saw no reference to any analytical tool other than the Goodwin formula that you used in making your debt service coverage recommendation for Smeco. Is it true that you did not?
Yes, the only analytical tool, yes, was the Goodwin formula.
No. You've talked about Mr. Collett's use of a peer group analysis. You're not testifying that a peer group analysis in and of itself is an irrelevant analytical tool, correct?
No. So, as Mr. Collett referred himself, I believe in his rebuttal, for IOU ROE proceedings, we routinely use peer group analyses. My concerns with his peer group analysis is that, as he noted, Smeco is a regulated cooperative, which is very unique, and I felt that his selection criteria for his peer group was not rigorous enough to provide a fair comparison. I mean, as he just noted in his testimony here today, Northern Virginia Cooperative had some subsidiaries and other businesses outside of its electric distribution system, which Smeco doesn't have that I'm aware of. So again, there are very unique and idiosyncratic differences for cooperatives, I think, what was not taken into account.
So if I understand your testimony correctly, you aren't opposed to using a peer group analysis as a tool to determine returns, DSCs, tiers, but rather you believe that the peers Mr. Collett identified may not actually be peers and therefore are irrelevant, correct?
Yes, I think that's a fair statement, yes.
You did not do any analysis to determine whether any of the peers identified by Mr. Collett were actually peers or not peers of Smeco in your mind, correct?
No, I did not do a thorough analysis of particularly the regulated cooperatives. I would say is the most appropriate to use. As I stated in my direct and rebuttal, I don't believe, or surrebuttal, that IOUs are appropriate, for example, in any circumstance.
In your involvement with cases where peers have been used to assess an appropriate return on equity for investor-owned utilities, as part of those analyses of appropriate peers, you also analyze the group of peers offered by the IOUs and determine which among that group you don't believe are peers, correct?
Typically, yes.
Is this a company-by-company analysis?
Sure, yeah.
So as we've just discussed, you did not analyze the companies on Mr. Collett's list. You simply dismissed them, correct?
Yes, that's fair.
So regarding IOUs, I'd like to, I guess, direct your attention to page 14 of your direct testimony.
Yeah.
Lines 6 through 8.
Mm-hmm.
You dismissed the IOU electric utilities as a group, correct?
That's correct.
And then on page 14, lines 2 through 3 of your direct testimony, you dismissed non-regulated cooperatives as a group as well, correct?
Correct, yes.
And on page 13 of your direct testimony, lines 3 through 5, you reject regulated cooperatives as a group, saying that reviewing what cooperatives around the country might be helpful, but that has no bearing in this proceeding, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So you're not testifying that there are no relevant peers in this group, correct? You're simply claiming that there is no evidence in the record establishing the companies identified by Mr. Collett as relevant peers.
Yeah, I guess so. My argument is that, particularly for the regulated electric cooperatives, is that you just simply are not aware if they are peers, because it is an idiosyncratic industry-regulated cooperatives, and we're not aware if states have specific laws or what kind of policies that have different requirements in states.
On page 15 of your direct testimony, lines 14 through 16,
Mhm.
you asked the question whether there is any precedent in Maryland for using the Goodwin formula, and you cite a chop tank case, correct?
That's correct.
You also indicate that staff has used the Goodwin formula in Smeco's last 3 rate cases, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
The chop tank case that you refer to, I believe that's case 9368, is a 9-year-old case, correct?
Yes.
We can all agree in that case, the commission acknowledged that although relevant in the chop tank case, the Goodwin formula may not be a perfect analytical tool, correct?
Yes, I believe they use that exact phrase, yes.
In fact, on page 6 of your testimony, I'll let you give you a moment to turn to that if you'd like.
Sure.
Lines 12 through 13, you state very few, if any, analytical tools are perfect.
Yes, yeah. So, I'm not sure there is a perfect tool, and the commission has made similar statements in IOU proceedings that they won't dismiss or reject any particular models. All have their own strengths and weaknesses.
Now, we just briefly mentioned that staff has recommended or used the Goodwin formula in the last 3 Smeco rate cases to come up with a DSC recommendation. Just to clarify, you didn't intend to suggest that staff proposing the adoption of the Goodwin formula in Smeco's last 3 rate cases constitute commission precedent.
Yes, that's a fair statement. I believe all of those were settled, so there was no final commission order on what method to use to determine appropriate DSC.
So the last 3 rate cases that Smeco recommended, in which staff recommended a DSC coverage for Smeco, those cases were settled.
I believe so, subject to check, yes. I know at least the last one was. I participated.
And so there was no agreement among the parties in those cases regarding reliance on or the use of the Goodwin formula for the purposes of informing debt service coverage
Not that I recall.
calculation. Were you the staff witness in those cases that used the Goodwin formula?
Just the previous one, 9688, I believe.
Is it true that you have never used the Goodwin formula to recommend a DSC ratio for any Maryland utility other than Smeco?
That is correct. So, as everyone's well aware, Smeco is the only regulated cooperative still in Maryland. That's rate regulated, at least. So yes, in IOU proceedings, the Goodwin formula and DSCs are not relied upon. It's an ROE analysis.
So you've not testified in any cases involving a cooperative other than Smeco?
No, I have not. I don't believe so.
Isn't it true that the commission itself has never used or approved the use of the Goodwin formula in any base rate case other than the one chop tank case 9 years ago?
I believe that's a correct statement. I believe that's the only cooperative rate case proceeding that had a final order in the last 9 years that went to a hearing that I can recall. There may have been one other, but we only have one now, so there's not very many proceedings.
Could you please turn to page 11 of your direct testimony?
Sure.
I direct your attention to lines 7 through 9, and here you state, Smeco's financial metrics have been improving since 2016. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
To avoid any doubt in the record, this statement could be more accurate if it said from 2016 through 2021, Smeco's financial metrics have been improving, correct?
Sure, that's a fair statement. Yeah, as I note in the next sentence, I say through 2021, Smeco had greatly improved its DSC and equity ratio. And I also provide a clarification, I believe, in a data request as well. But yes, so from 2016 through 2021, there were improving metrics, and 22 and 23, they did decrease.
Would you agree that cooperatives compete with both other cooperatives and investor-owned utilities when accessing debt markets?
I can't speak to exactly how they're accessing the debt markets, but I would say yes, that's a fair statement.
I have no further questions for the witness.
I do not have any questions. I believe we've been through. Is there any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. McCall.
Thank you.
And since we are done, I'm going to propose that we adjourn for lunch until 1:15. That gives us a little bit extra time. So a little more than 45 minutes, 55 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe. You heading somewhere fun? Are you heading on vacation?